Hi, YouTube. Like many of you, I watched the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate, and I only have a couple of small points to make because I think really it's been covered by people far more skilled than myself at dissecting these things. I thought it was a good debate. I thought that Bill Nye, had a good accounting for himself and did a good job at defending science and the scientific method. And some of his facial expressions were really priceless when Ken Ham was speaking. He kind of looked like, you're really saying that right now? And I thought that was great. The point that I wanted to bring up is when Ken Ham starts talking about the uniformity of nature, and this is something that's always bothered me a little bit. Essentially he's saying that you as a naturalist or a scientist or an atheist or as a non-theist, you can't account for the uniformity of nature. And that's bothered me because it's not something in science we need to account for. It's just something that we observe. Maybe at some point science could actually get there. Maybe mathematicians will get there. I'm not sure. But it's not something that we need to account for necessarily. It's something that's observed. And the proof for its utility is in our ability to build models with predictive powers and to actually, at the end of this long machinery, to come out with useful data, useful products, useful results of the scientific method. That's where the rubber meets the road sort of thing. But what really gets me is here's the camp who is saying we can account for the uniformity of nature. It's written in this book here that we can account for the uniformity of nature. We have the only basis for it. But that same camp is the one who is putting forth the exceptions to the rule, the times when the uniformity of nature was suspended, at which point it's not uniform. I mean, that's something is either uniform or it's not. As soon as there are exceptions, as soon as there are interruptions in uniformity, you can no longer claim uniformity. And so that's just something that's always bothered me a little bit. And nobody seems to really point that out. And I think it's important. The other thing that I thought was cute actually was in one of the post-debate shows on, I think it was Creation Today, where Eric Hovind and Paul Taylor were discussing the debate. And they were talking, as always, about evolutionists, which is something that also always bothers me. They're talking about cosmology, and then they start talking about evolutionists would say X. Well, I don't know what evolutionists have to do with cosmology. And this could be excused if this was sort of day one in the discussion, but it's not. And so, they really don't have any excuse for continuing this silly nomenclature deal with evolutionists. It's sort of anything, that they don't like is thrown into that bag. But what I found interesting too, and again, there's no excuse for this anymore, is when Eric Hovind started talking about speciation.
There's only about, 1,000 different land-dwelling kinds of animals. And then Bill Nye used kind of a straw man argument to say, well, what about all these millions of species? Well, he's including fish and beetles,
bacteria,
and
viruses.
Yeah,
bacteria. I mean, that's a standard, and really, I hope he knows better than that. But people have been throwing that up for tens of millions of species, and they say they're lowballing it. Maybe they are, but they're including all sorts of things that very clearly didn't have to be on the ark.
Right, and not to mention the idea that, okay, you can have 3 different types of frogs that the outside two can't interbreed, but they can interbreed here, but they call them all different species.
Yeah.
So obviously, I don't think this looks good for Eric, except maybe in playing to his base, because clearly this is a definitional issue, right? Yes, in other news, we're continuing to map the cosmos and developing definitions for things that we observe there. Similarly, in geology, heaven forbid that we make classifications that are useful to us in communicating with one another when we're further investigating these things. This is just purely a definitional issue, and I hope that this is only out of ignorance and not out of an intent to play to his base, but I just don't see how he could have the excuse anymore. Either way, it's pretty silly. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that they've kind of painted themselves into a bit of a corner here. And I'll start by saying that I'm not a big proponent of the theory of evolution, only because I know my own limitations, and I haven't researched it enough to be a big vocal proponent for it. But it's kind of interesting to see them reject the term species. You notice what they're not doing is they're not rejecting the notion that, these two frogs can interbreed and these two frogs can interbreed, but I don't know if I can do it. These two frogs cannot. Just the term species because it poses a bit of a problem for fitting all the animals on the ark, all the species on the ark. They want to use the term kinds. And again, this paints them into a bit of a corner because they want to say only needed so many kinds of animals to fill the ark. But by extension, what they're actually admitting to is evolution. In other words, to get from that base number to all the species that we have now, of all the same kinds that can no longer interbreed with one another. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. In any case, like I said, I think more people have covered this debate far better than I can. I think it was good. I think we need to keep sowing the seeds of rationality, and hopefully we can reach people that way. I don't think anybody probably on either side of the fence was swayed much by the debate. But again, I think those seeds are very important. Thanks very much for watching.